my parents were what I would call, middle class people. My father was a plumber and he had his own business, and my mother was a homemaker. So I do remember a pretty happy early childhood. We lived in Antwerp, in a Jewish section of Antwerp, in a street called Korte Kiewitzstraat. But at the age of 6.5, my parents sent me to kindergarten in an all-day Hebrew school. And it was while I was in first grade that my sister Lillian was born. She's 8 years younger than I am. Needless to say, it was a very happy occasion for us because World War II had already started. Belgium was invaded by Germany on May 10th, 1940, just a few months later. And when they invaded Belgium, my family, by the way, along with thousands of other people from Belgium, tried to flee Belgium to northern France. And so we tried to flee the Germans, but we never made it to Germany, to northern France, because, and we were fleeing on foot, by the way, When the Germans caught up with us, they made us all turn around and go back wherever we came from. Because there were not only Jewish people fleeing, there were Belgian people that were fleeing also, non-Jewish. We went back to Antwerp, and even though my parents tried to reestablish a normal life, it lasted a very short time because very soon the anti-Jewish decrees and regulations, were issued. Like they got rid of all Jewish professional people, lawyers, doctors, school teachers, all Jewish-owned businesses had to have signs on them, outside on the windows or the doors, saying they were Jewish-owned businesses. And non-Jewish people were actually urged not to patronize those stores. And then it continued on. They put on a curfew for us. Thereby, restricting freedom of movement. And then they kicked us out. They kicked out all the Jewish children from schools, from public schools. And then they started imposing a special forced labor on the Jews in Belgium. And then at the very end of the edicts, they made us wear yellow stars. And I remember wearing my yellow star on my jacket on my lapel. And then many, many Jewish people in Antwerp suddenly started to disappear. You never saw them again. In August 1942, my father received a notice in the mail to go to a forced labor camp in northern France. My father was young at the time. He was only 39 years old. He was in very good health. And he felt he could survive a labor camp. But I also want you to know that my parents did not know at that particular time. Remember, this is early 1942, mid-1942. They didn't know about two things that were occurring at that time. One was called the initiation of the final solution. And the other thing they didn't know at that particular time was the existence of the concentration camps. They had no idea. On August 15th, 1942, we went to the train station in Antwerp to say goodbye to my father. And it was a very, very difficult scene there. I mean, there were thousands of people there, a lot of hugging and kissing and crying and all that. But what I remember mostly are the words that my father said to me. And I'm repeating them to you word for word. You're the little man in the house now, and so you'll have to help take care of your mother and your sister until I come back. And I said I would. I took it very seriously because it was a very traumatic time and moment. You know, here my father was leaving, and I was very, very attached to my dad, you know. And I'll be very frank with you also, I mean, speaking personally, that basically that was the day I lost my childhood. And I was only 10 years old at that time because I became suddenly, you know, I became very serious. I had all this responsibility, you know, on me. A little later, we actually received a postcard from my father that indeed showed that he was in northern France. Very shortly after that, in September, the street that we lived on got raided by the Nazis. And what they did is to come in the middle of the night, you know, when everybody was sleeping, and then started pulling out the Jewish people from their homes, starting at each end of the street simultaneously. There was a lot of commotion, a lot of yelling, you know, a lot of screaming, a lot of noise. And that actually woke my mother up. So she quickly grabbed my baby sister and myself and a blanket. And we went up to the top of the house. And we lay there, you know, really not knowing what was going to happen to us, you know. And then a little later on, you know, we heard our door being broken down. And then there was a lot of commotion because then it turned out that the Nazis had trashed the inside of the house, but they didn't find us. And so we stayed on the roof until my mother was absolutely sure that the raid was over. And then she said to me, okay, she said, I'm going to see one of our neighbors who's not Jewish. And she was going to see this one particular man who was a policeman in Antwerp. And he was also a member of the Belgium Underground. It was a group of Belgian civilian people that banded together secretly to fight the Nazis. She went out the house, went around the block, saw our friend, and came back and told me that she had made arrangements to hide my sister and I in a Catholic convent. At the next night, at the appointed time, my mother smuggled us out through the rear of the house, except this time there was a car waiting for us in the street, and the car took us out of town, and my mother dropped us off at the convent. But she took me aside and she said to me, look, she says, you're going to go now to a strange place. Strange people are going to take care of you. And what I want you to keep in mind are a couple of things. Number one, do anything and everything to survive. And the second thing that she did is, of course, she says, just make sure that nobody finds out that you are Jewish. My mother went back to Antwerp, and my mother joined the Belgium underground. And my mother became a courier, a messenger. We stayed in the convent actually until the end of December 1942, because suddenly my mother shows up to take us out of there. I said, how come you showed up? Well, it turns out that the Belgium underground, they found out somehow that the convent that we were in was going to be raided by the Nazis. And they immediately told her. So as soon as she found out, she came down right away, to take us out of there. She also warned, and this was very important, by the way, she also warned Mother Superior that if she was hiding any other Jewish people there, to move them out. And I truly believe, with this one action, my mother saved a couple of lives. So then my mother took us out of there, and she dropped us off with another member of the Belgium underground until she could find another place to hide us. So my mother placed my sister with a private Catholic family, and she blended in quite well. And they really were very, very good to her, and they loved her a lot. I, on the other hand, my mother decided to send me to a Catholic boys' orphanage in a village called Weelde. And the priest that ran the orphanage, he ran a couple of orphanages, he took wonderful care of me. His name was Father Ivor Cornelissen. As soon as I got there, by the way, he did two things for me. First of all, he changed my name. And my name became Willie Peters. And secondly, what he did for me is he gave me false baptismal papers. Indeed, for all practical purposes, outwardly, I was Catholic. I went to church every single day. And I also went to Catholic parochial school every single day. But Father Cornelissen was quite a smart man. He felt that it was too dangerous for me to stay in one place too long. He didn't feel comfortable with that. So after I stayed there for a few months, he transferred me to another orphanage that he ran. However, in May 1944, that orphanage that I was in was raided by the Nazis. And incidentally, I never found out how it happened, but I was caught. And the way I was caught, by the way, was very, very simple. Since it was a boys' orphanage, they made us all undress naked, and only the Jewish boys were circumcised. So that's how I got caught. Papers didn't help, nothing helped. And not only that, that's when I found out that there were 5 other Jewish boys there. We all kept it very secret from each other. So they took us to prison, and they questioned us. They wanted to know where there were more Jewish people in hiding, which we didn't know. A few days later, suddenly in the middle of the night, they rounded up a bunch of Jewish children and they put us on a freight train. As soon as we got on a freight train, the oldest boy, whose name was Joseph, by the way, it kind of became our leader because all of us were much younger than he was. And right away, he started urging us to escape from the train. Joseph had a pair of boots, and in one of the boots, he had a piece of steel roughly a foot long. What he did is while the train was moving, he used that piece of steel to pry away wood and made an opening large enough for himself because he was the biggest person there. The train never stopped, but did slow down at a very sharp bend. And suddenly he says, "That's it." And he took us one by one and pushed us out of the train. I would not jump out of the train. I was so scared. And Joseph physically grabbed me and physically pushed me out the opening. Dawn was breaking and we looked out in the distance and we saw woods. And as a group, we went and we hid in the woods. So Joseph said, okay, he says, I'll try to find out where we are. He came back the very next day and he told us that he thought that we were still in Belgium because he had seen a sign of a village called Perouet. After a while, he makes a decision all by himself to go back into the village of Perouet, go to the rectory next to the Catholic Church, speak to the priest over there, and tell him about us. He was very receptive to helping us. It took a while, but he came up with a very secret plan where he placed each one of us with a private Catholic family in the village. And by the way, each family thought that they had the only Jewish child. The people that hid me were called Monsieur and Madame Bautier, and they were wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people. And they hid me upstairs in the attic. So I would be able to go out at night to get some fresh air. And not only that, they were very nice to me. And they bought me a pet rabbit so I would have somebody to play with. We were liberated in the fall of 1944. And we were liberated by the American troops. So as soon as we were liberated, the Bautier family was really, they were wonderful, wonderful people. They were nice enough to start looking for my mother. It took a while, but it's with the help of the Belgian Red Cross that they found my mother in the hospital in Namur. While she was part of the underground, had kept track of me, to make sure that I was okay. And she found out that I had been caught. My mother was going to see another Catholic priest. He had very good connections with the Germans. And was there anything that she could do, not knowing where I was, was there anything that she could do to help me? The day she arrived in Namur for the appointment was also the day the Allies bombed the city. and my mother was caught in the air raid, and she completely lost her left leg, was completely severed from her. My mother is very, very sick, but she's alive. You know, I'm alive. My sister, I know my sister's alive. Our part of Belgium, not the whole of Belgium, our part of Belgium had been liberated. Now, all we had to do was to wait for the war to end in Europe, have my father come back so we could be reunited and we could be a family again. You know, we could start living a normal life like everybody else. But my mother, like I told you, unfortunately was very sick. She had lost a tremendous amount of blood. And I was put in a home. We stayed there until the war ended in May 1945. And very soon after that, more Jewish children started arriving, and all these children came back from concentration camps. And that is how we started to learn about the horrors of the Holocaust. And I have to tell you, that time was a wonderful, wonderful time, except for me personally. It was a terrible time. And the reason was that while I was in that home, 3 different people had come back and told my mother that my father was not coming back anymore. That my father had died in a concentration camp called Auschwitz. And that was a very big blow to me personally because I was very attached to my dad. So in the meanwhile, also, my mother and my uncle had made arrangements that when he got back to the States, he would gather our family. My family used to live mostly in the metropolitan New York City area. He would get them to sponsor us, which they did. So they sponsored us, and we left Antwerp on a ship called the USS Marine Tiger. We left April 7th, 1948, and we arrived in New York Harbor 10 days later on April 17th, 1948. So that's when we went to Brooklyn in a section called East New York in Brooklyn. And that's where we started our life. I never lost my faith. It never wavered. Never did. Nope. It never did. And that's basically because my parents instilled that in me. They instilled all the positive aspects of Judaism, and that never left me. It's just, I will say this much. I just could not understand what was going on in World War II. The Holocaust happened, and of course, the effects of the Holocaust, were there basically for the first few years. We told our family about it, but we did not speak publicly. And basically, we didn't speak too much about it, amongst ourselves. It was something that we wanted to forget. We wanted to put in the past and go on with our lives. Like I made myself a promise once I got here, okay, that I would go to school. I would learn how to speak. By the way, I did not speak any English.
Mhm.
I would learn how to speak English. Um, I would make new friends, and I would. By the way, that was one of my main goals. I would become an American citizen. It took 5 years to do that, to become an American citizen. And then I made up my mind, I'm going to try to live the American life. And I did. The only way that I started speaking is basically because of the Shoah Foundation. So they came to interview me here, and they were the ones that urged me to speak. Once I retired, I started speaking. And I am very, very, very happy, that I am speaking because it's important. I feel a very great responsibility because history is not being taught, my opinion, the way it should be taught. History is very important because that's how we learn how regimes, survived, how countries were created, how mistakes were made, how not to repeat the same mistakes. So that's why I feel it's really very important that I speak about the Holocaust and make it my business, to speak as much as I can. And unfortunately, Holocaust survivors are dying very, very rapidly. One of the things that I've been trying to find out is over all these years that I've been speaking, how many children did I speak to? And I can't find out, but I know it's got to be tens and tens of thousands. My life has been a good life. Believe it or not, I've lived the American dream. I am extremely proud to be an American citizen, number one. I love our country. It's been good to me. All I can say to you, things have changed dramatically, dramatically. You know, since I came here in 1948 to now, in 2024.